Hey everyone, welcome back to the Pixel Meditations. This is your host Steve, and with me as usual is Toby. And today we are here to tell you that we read a book.
Yeah, well I just read a book. You had read this book for, I guess, like months, and you're just like waiting for me to finish the book.
Not months, I mean I think maybe, I don't know, 2 months I think. And I've probably forgotten half of it since then, but I'm feeling pretty good about this episode. So we're talking about the book Circe, or Circe, or Circe. How do you say this girl's name?
In my head, I just read it as Circe. I don't know.
Circe. Okay. Circe.
I think Circe is probably good.
Okay. For the sake of this podcast, we're just going to use Circe. You know, I feel like Circe sounds better, but okay. Circe. It's Circe. Anyway, Circe is a Greek goddess of sorts, or she's technically a titan, actually. For anyone who's familiar with Greek mythology. And we want to start by just giving you guys a basic outline of this book. We really think you guys should read this book. It's really good. It's written by a woman named Madeline Miller. She also wrote another book on... what's her other book's name? Achilles. Something about Achilles.
Achilles.
Yeah, she wrote another book on Achilles. But we haven't read that one. Or at least I haven't. And we just read Circe. And we think this book is really cool. It's sort of a retelling of the Odyssey in some ways. And... more importantly, about one of the more minor characters in the book, Circe, of course, who is a witch. She uses plants and herbs and the natural environment to craft different magic spells. And Toby, do you want to kind of give an outline of some more of the background of this book?
Yeah, so I think most people, if they've ever heard of the goddess Circe, it's probably from the Odyssey itself. So famously in the Odyssey, Odysseus and his men travel to an island. I'm not sure if the name of the island is actually mentioned in the Odyssey. It could be, I'm not sure. But the island's name is Aea. Actually, I could be pronouncing that wrong. But it's Aea, at least in my head.
That sounds right to me. We'll go with that.
Yeah. Okay. And this island, so this island is known to have a witch on the island, and famously in the Odyssey, when Odysseus travels there, they go up to her kind of, I guess, lair, and Odysseus's men they're kind of like up to no good, and they end up trying to like steal stuff, I think, and then Circe turns all of the men into pigs, and then Odysseus comes later and kind of convinces Circe to change them back into humans. But that's kind of like your only encounter with Circe, is this sort of tale. And it's kind of told in a way that kind of paints Circe as in a very like kind of negative way. Like some people even go so far as to say that it's kind of like misogynistic towards women. Like it's like trying to say that like powerful women possess like kind of like devious qualities or something like that. Like it has like almost like a misogynistic kind of like tone. At least some people interpret it that way. That might just be like one interpretation, but some people sort of think that way. And I think the premise of this book is basically kind of like a retelling of that character that Odysseus encountered on his journey, and sort of like to give her sort of like a more understandable, sympathetic kind of background. And I think that's kind of where this book starts.
Yeah, I guess I'll just comment on that a little bit. I haven't read the Odyssey in about a decade, so to be honest, I don't remember this part all that well. But I kind of feel like she might have been painted a little bit misogynistically, if that's how you say that word. But I do feel like she's not exactly evil, because you think about a character like Calypso, I think, who tries to like keep Odysseus on her island and forces him to fall in love with him. But I think that Circe is sort of a character that maybe they did paint her sort of as like this evil witch who crafts her magic and tries to seduce men or something. I feel like that's something that could definitely be in the Odyssey. But she actually doesn't. Her and Odysseus have this sort of relationship because he's stuck there for a season while his boat's getting repaired. So he's there for like a half year to a year on this island. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure. Like I said, I can't remember exactly how this is told in the Odyssey, which is kind of a shame. But we're going to be sticking mostly to this text, Circe, and I think everything Toby said is pretty much correct there. Now, Circe is also the daughter of Helios. She's the daughter of Helios, who's the god of the sun, and she's technically a Titan, the gods that kind of revolted against the Olympians, Zeus and Hercules and all those gods. So yeah, she's born a Titan, and she's kind of unspectacular. Most of the gods have these great spells. They're strong. They have magical powers. And Circe's not beautiful, nor is she powerful, at least as far as we can tell in the beginning of the book. And that's sort of where her tale begins. But from here, we're not actually going to retell you the whole story of the book. We're going to kind of get into some of the morality. So, Toby, I think we can stick to the beginning part of the book first, where she's sort of in Helios's halls, and she's sort of living her adolescence.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So she's a Titan, but she's also kind of like a nymph, and nymphs are known to be lesser female goddesses, and like you said, they don't really possess a lot of great powers. They're usually very minor characters in Greek mythology in general. So she's sort of like just a minor nymph in kind of the Hall of the Gods, and so she's just sort of like trying to grow and develop in this sort of world or this universe with all these really powerful beings around her all the time. And unfortunately, for various reasons, she's like picked on like horrendously by the other gods. Like, for one thing, they tell her never to speak because her voice is too horrendous to even listen to, which is pretty crazy. They make fun of how she looks and just like literally everything about her. Like, they're so cruel to her from the very, very beginning. And like, even among her like siblings, like she has a sibling called Aetes. Did you call him Aetes? We're going to be doing this the whole episode with the names.
Yeah, I know, seriously. Aedes or Aedes, something like that.
Yeah, so Circe has a brother, Aetes, who's also famous in other myths, like Jason and Medea. He's really famous from that story. Mm-hmm. But Aetes, like, he's Circe's younger brother, and like Circe raises him because Circe's mother, who I'm forgetting the name of now.
I don't remember either.
She's not really that important, but she basically doesn't want to raise this like other lesser nymph, or actually this lesser god, Aetes, like whatever. She's like, I don't care about him. Like, you raise him, Circe. You're horrible. Like, here's a job for you. Just raise this, like, and like she's literally like raising Aetes, and like Circe thinks that like she has this like great relationship with her brother, and they're on this island together. But like, as soon as like Aetes like grows up or whatever, he's just like, oh, I want my own kingdom, and like, you suck anyway, and your voice sounds bad. Bye, peace out. It's like she can't even have like a nice relationship with her like brother. It's just like every single thing is like kind of turned against her, and it's really crappy.
I think in the beginning, it's apparent that Circe just wants to be accepted by somebody. Her whole premise is just to be accepted and have somewhat of a functional family situation, where maybe she has a brother or a parent or someone who actually cares about her and who actually like spends time with her. And Aedes sort of fills that role in the beginning, right? They go down to the river together. They enjoy the water while he's really young. But like you said, as soon as he gets older, he starts to realize he has powers, and that Circe's... But this is a question. Doesn't he actually know? Because he knows deep down that Circe has some kind of power, doesn't he?
Yeah, he may pick up on it in some way. I'm not sure. But ultimately, he decides that he really doesn't care for her at all, and is just like, peace out, bye.
Yeah, he's sort of one of the more... The funny thing about that is he's actually one of the more sympathetic characters towards her for the first half of the book. But yeah. Essentially, as soon as he can get his own land, it's sort of like, well, you have your own problem. He doesn't exactly hate Circe or like abandon her. Well, yeah, he does abandon her, actually. That's exactly what he does. He gets his own... He tries to get his own kingdom, and he's basically like, well, this is what happens to me. But there's a really important event here in that Circe, she ends up having sympathy for this character who everyone knows, Prometheus, the god who gave god who gave humans fire. Circe ends up helping him, giving him water and food, while all the other gods are about to let him be brought into eternal torment. This is kind of like her first act of rebellion against her life. Her life as a minor nymph. And I think that's sort of a turning point for her. And Aedes sort of lets her get punished for this. And he's like, well, I got my kingdom. This happens to you. And it's kind of like a grand conspiracy, because her family's like, well, who's like the least important of our children? And of course, that is Circe. They sort of just say, okay, we're going to just sacrifice her so that way Zeus isn't angry at us and just put her on her own island. And that's sort of basically the first part of the book summed up.
Although, so actually before you get to that, so I should correct you, on that. Actually, so she's sympathetic towards Prometheus at the beginning of the book, but that sin is actually, so that is her greatest sin, is to help Prometheus, but that's actually not why she was punished by the gods. So that actually was a secret that she helped Prometheus. Yeah. So it wasn't really known by the gods that she did this until the very end. And it is her greatest sin to have helped Prometheus during this time. It was, yeah, because Prometheus committed the greatest sin against the gods by giving humanity fire. So that brought the greatest wrath that Zeus has ever basically had towards another god. But actually, so what ended up causing the punishment of Circe is she has a sister. I think it was a sister, Scylla.
Scylla. Yeah.
I don't know, man. We're gonna be doing this the whole time. Like Scylla. I don't know. Scylla. Scylla. How do you say that? I don't know. Scylla. But Scylla was just kind of like this really mean girl in the court, like another kind of lesser god, and she just like ruthlessly like made fun of Circe, like constantly, like always made fun of her, like all the time. And like Circe's kind of like just taking it and just getting kind of angry and stuff. She eventually kind of develops like the knowledge through other events in the book that she actually possesses some amount of powers. So she finds out that she has this like witchcraft, and she finds it out through actually a relationship with a mortal, and it's actually her first relationship with a mortal, Glaucus. She basically, through various circumstances in the book, finds out that she has this kind of like power, but it's witchcraft, and it's kind of like this like kind of mysterious power that like the gods don't really know about, but they know it exists, and it's really kind of mysterious.
Pharmacus.
Yeah. and she uses this power on this mortal to kind of turn him into a god. And she ends up like in this kind of like love relationship with him. But as soon as Glaucus turns into a god, like Glaucus becomes horrendous too towards Circe. And he becomes a terrible person, like a terrible god, like just instantly. Like he's like, as soon as he has like these god powers, he just becomes like the most awful god. Like he's like seeking out power. He wants like his own kingdom or whatever. He wants to like smite other humans. Like he just becomes like really horrible. And then like Circe just feels terrible. And she uses her powers eventually to like turn Glaucus into like a fish or fish-headed god or something. I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, that's sort of like a lesser point. The bigger point is that Circe ends up using her powers to turn this like kind of like her sister Scylla into kind of like a monster that it's actually another famous monster from the Odyssey. So this monster like lives in like a cave in the Mediterranean and just kind of like comes out and like sucks up sailors and kills them. And she's like a terrible, terrible monster. And Circe feels this like crazy guilt for doing that. And doing this, having turned her sister into that monster, the gods are like, okay, you're punished. You're exiled from us forever, and you're going to your island now. And so she ends up on her island Aea, and then she's like free to kind of just like develop her witchcraft even further on the island.
Yeah. And this sort of brings us to the main topic of the episode. We're kind of wondering about, well, we're not really wondering. We're going to be exploring the idea of mortality versus immortality. And there's this great line from the first part of the book. I remember this where Circe asks Prometheus. She says, well, they're immortal, right? That means they died. And Prometheus kind of explains the short lifespan of human beings. And then she's like, well, how do humans live like that? How can they live knowing they're going to die in less than 100 years? And Prometheus says something like, they just bear it the best they can, or something like that. And sort of this is Circe's really her first exploration into the fact that there's mortal beings and that she's immortal and doesn't have this sort of feeling. Because I think Prometheus himself is sort of, he's immortal, but he's experiencing like life and death on a daily cycle, right? Like every day he wakes up and his liver and his skin's healed, and a bird comes and like rips out his liver again. And he's basically just living this cycle over and over again until the end of time. So he's like the ultimate mortal in some ways. Like he's just living and dying day in and day out. And so I think Circe really feels this very strongly. And so I think this is a really great line in the book. And this is a point where Circe really starts to sympathize, I think, for human beings. And Glaucus, the other guy, that bad god that she turned into a fish or whatever that she fell in love with, he's like the opposite. He had mortality. He was a good person. And then as soon as he became immortal, he became a dick. Just like he basically, well, what really happens that we didn't really talk about is Scylla's really beautiful. And so Glaucus falls in love with Scylla. He wants the most beautiful goddess. He thinks Circe is really beautiful until he becomes a god himself and sees that there's more beautiful gods. And Circe is actually a little bit plain compared to a lot of the other goddesses.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think it's really wonderful that how just effortlessly Miller just sort of weaves in all of these different sort of Greek myths that like people are pretty like they're semi-familiar with, but like not really like in true depth or whatever. But like she's so knowledgeable about them, and she's just like constantly interweaving them. And I really, really love how kind of like at the base of the whole story is like the idea of Prometheus and kind of her sympathies with Prometheus. So that's really like her first, like, it's her first kind of her greatest sin, but also like the first time that she's actually like doing her own thing and kind of stepping away from kind of the path that she was born into. And yeah, all of her interactions with mortals from then on, it's all a little bit different. And she kind of sees things in a little bit of a different way. And at the end of the book, you really start to realize that like one of the lessons in this book is to kind of follow your own path and to not really just follow the fates. Try and do your own thing. Don't just like listen to what other people tell you to do at all times in your life. And I think that's one of the like lessons you really gain from that. But yeah, I mean, I think the fact that she's so curious about mortals is really fascinating. And it's really kind of like brought on by the cruelty that kind of she experiences. So she's driven to Prometheus from everybody just kind of shunning her and hating her. And then it's like she's sympathetic with other mortals and she develops relationships with them. But her relationships with mortals are very, very different from the relationships that most gods have with mortals. So like gods like Athena, like they like mortals too, but they only like mortals insofar as they can use them for like the purposes of pursuing power. And especially Athena, she really wants to like have like mortals that can like basically be like warriors and like conquer cities and like, you know, found dynasties and all this stuff. Like she's really into that. Like, and most gods seem to be more compelled by power than pretty much anything else. And it's kind of like her counterpoint to like being a divine being is it's like, yeah, you have these infinite powers, but what are you going to do with these infinite powers forever? You know? So I think she's really bringing that into the story. And like one of the aspects that really comes out is that, yeah, like life is kind of meaningless as a god, you know, unless you're sort of pursuing power and basically pursuing other like control of other beings. And yeah, it's kind of like something we're introduced at the very beginning.
So yeah, you talked about Athena basically being powerful and just wanting to move around people like they're chess pieces on like a board. But what is the purpose in that? You know, if you're Athena, you live forever. You basically have unlimited power already. You can step onto the battlefield. If you read the book, the Iliad, or even the Odyssey, I think, you'll see that the gods often do just jump into immortal affairs. In the Iliad, there's often literally gods fighting alongside the human characters against the other army. So if you're like Athena, is there really a ton of meaning in taking a character like Odysseus and moving him around as like some kind of chess piece? Like what kind of meaning as a god would you get from that?
I mean, I think the only meaning is sort of the prestige and power that you can sort of gain from that. So like they were saying in the book that prior to Odysseus, there wasn't really a mortal who was you know, a great traveler or kind of like a great kind of warrior of his day. Like all other ones, like Hercules. I think she writes him as Heracles. It's like Hercules or Heracles. But like all the other ones were kind of like children of the gods themselves. So like Odysseus is like kind of like the first mortal to achieve this like great status that no other mortal before him had ever achieved in terms of just kind of like the grand scale of his voyages and just sort of like his extreme kind of military successes. Like he just like reached this like this height of that's never been seen before. And Athena was really in love with that aspect of him. The fact that he was such a great, powerful, influential human or mortal.
Yeah, I just find this to be really kind of a funny point. I mean, obviously, this is something that Miller is thinking about as well. But okay, so she moves around Odysseus, and Odysseus does these great things. And then 80 years old, well, 80 years later, he dies. And then so what is Athena going to do then? Probably go for one of his heirs. But like the point is, like 1,000 years, Athena would still be there. And then Odysseus would just be a memory. So is there really any meaning in this? I guess that would be my question here. Like,
well, I mean, you have to ask the gods that. I don't know, but I mean, ultimately, whatever mortals can provide gods is a temporary sort of thing, and I think that's why at the beginning of the book, I think you sort of learned that most gods sort of don't mess with humans, and they don't even care about humans. They're just sort of too minor and uninteresting to really care about at all. Mm-hmm. Like I think Helios really doesn't care that much about humans. The sun god, like he's just like whatever. Like he's very like Helios is always very unmoved by things, and he just doesn't really care that much. And I think most gods are not very moved by humans. A few of them are though, and I think Athena is one that is kind of trying, like she's kind of frequently interfering in human affairs.
Yeah, Zeus would definitely be another one, mainly just because he's sort of like the king of the gods and wants to have, I guess, like any woman that suits him. But also, I think like if we're going to go down this road, I think Hermes is actually kind of an interesting god to talk about. He's in the book Circe. He's actually the first god that Circe talks to when she's stuck on her island. Aya. All right, so when she's first put on this island in Aea, she has this really beautiful house, and obviously they took care of her to some extent. They made sure she didn't live like, a beggar, because they kind of wanted to at least stick it to Zeus a little bit, the Titans, I mean, Helios and all them. So they gave her a really nice house, replenishing food. She could basically live there comfortably forever, and as long as she doesn't really mind being alone, it's a very, very cozy existence. It's just not with other gods. However, she is visited by Hermes, who is also another god who's very interested in the affairs of, well, pretty much everybody, it seems.
Everybody. Yeah, it's true.
He's sort of like the gossip god. I mean, what is his actual role in the Greek pantheon? You remember? He's like the messenger god, right?
He's the messenger god. He has to be the god of something else, but it is kind of funny that he's so like he's just like the god of gossip. So I'm reading right now. Hermes is considered the herald of the gods, as well as the protector of human heralds, travelers, thieves, merchants, and orators. It doesn't say what he's the god of. He's just the herald. So he's kind of like the...
Well, I think he's fast. I think he's supposed to be really fast. So he's good at like traveling around and getting messages to other people. He's sort of like a runner. And like if you think of like Greek terms, people that ran from like one battlefield to a city, he would be kind of like that role. He's like he's quick. He knows the whole world. He knows geography. He can move around fast. I think that's kind of his role.
Yeah, and I think in the times of the ancients, like an actual messenger was considered to be like a very, I think it's kind of like a very important sort of prestigious role, because obviously communication is so limited in that time. So it makes sense kind of that a messenger from the gods is something that would hold a very important role, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess like in the book though, so that's like Hermes' role in the ancient Greek pantheon. But what did you think about his character in this novel?
I mean, it was kind of funny because, at first, like, Circe and Hermes kind of had like a love affair, but eventually it sort of developed into Circe kind of hating him. And like, I don't know, there was this line in the book that was really interesting. It was like Circe basically said, or maybe it was Hermes. I think maybe it was Hermes who said, like, I only come here because you don't want me to be here. As soon as you want me to be here, I won't come. It was something like that. I think that's what it's kind of
he's
funny.
He's a playboy.
He's a, but it's like I feel like that sort of underpins a lot of the story. Is this like idea that the gods are just playing against wills, and it's like if you don't want me to do this, I want to do this, and it's like if you want me to do this, I don't want to do this, and it's like they're kind of like at each other's like throats, kind of all the time. And that's kind of what I get with Hermes is he's really kind of just playing a game the whole time. It's like he's kind of it's not clear exactly his motivations, and yeah, he just kind of screwing with Circe.
Yeah, they have very shallow loyalties and they tend to change a lot. And I find this to be the same. I find the Greeks to actually be a little bit similar to this, though, because the Greeks are all city-states and like, they have very shallow loyalties as well. One thing the Greeks are really good at, which you could probably say the same of the Greek gods, is that when there's an outsider who comes and invades or an outsider who comes and threatens their existence, they all band together to get rid of this invader. Like the Greeks, you think of like the Persians or, someone like that. With the Greek gods, you think of like the Titans confronting them. But at the same time, whenever they don't really have like this giant, overwhelming force that's like threatening their existence, they basically just like turn on each other and make alliances and just do whatever suits them in the moment. And the Greeks are kind of like that themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's I don't know what it is. I think it's like a kind of like a Mediterranean sort of spirit as well. I feel it with the Italians too. Like left to their own devices, I think Italians, like their greatest enemies are always going to be like other Italians. They're just like at each other's throats pretty quickly, but at the same time, it's interesting that they kind of join forces if there is a cause to that kind of necessitates that. Like they can put aside their own grievances if there is a some purpose towards that end.
That's kind of weird to me because I always hear Italians are very communal and they actually have some of like they're some of the happiest. They live longer than a lot of people. Partially because they have such strong social structures, like huge families with like, tons of extended family and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that may be true, but they're always bickering and fighting. Trust me, Italian families fight and bicker and yell like no other. But there might be like kind of like a softness to it. I'm not sure, but you're right.
Yeah, anyway, that's how I see the Greek gods. I mean, I don't know. I think they're just too bored because they have eternity to do stuff and they all want to flex their muscles, right? They all want to say like, oh, I can do this. I have this power, but I have made Odysseus do this. It's like they're like little children on a playground that all want to like show off something, but none of them want to work towards it. Because one of the things that makes the gods interesting, coming back to this immortality versus mortality theme, is the gods don't have to work towards anything. If they want like this really strong weapon to appear, it just appears. If they want to create something, it's just created. It's just like by magic. And this is kind of maybe poking a little bit of fun at ancient religion in some ways, but it's also a reflection of, just how pointless the gods' lives are. They don't need to toil for anything. There's literally never a need to toil except for like dumb crap like fighting another god because you choose to start like some squabbling. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because a lot of what makes the gods interesting almost stems from their semi mortal sort of like behavior. Like the physical forms of the gods is fascinating because they look like mortals, but they have this like kind of like, I don't know, this like forever youthful kind of appearance. But yeah, I found like certain scenes to be a little bit, it's kind of like I had to like kind of imagine sort of like what the life of a god would be like, because like it would talk about like how like Circe was tired and she needed to sleep, and I'm just thinking like, does she really need to sleep, or is she just doing that just for like fun? Is it like actually a requirement that she sleeps? Like, and they always talk about like the gods had like banquets with food and all this stuff, and it's like, are they really needing to eat all this food if they're truly gods? Like, it's almost like so much of being a god is just for show. And I feel like eating just becomes for show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a scene where a god is eating some like crusty old bread or something. Like, I don't think that scene exists. They always have these glorious banquets and these giant like festivities. But that's a really good point, actually. I don't know. I mean, obviously in real life, I think this is sort of just the fact that in all likelihood, the Greek pantheon doesn't exist in, ancient Greeks thousands of years ago. made these gods, and they're sort of half formed from ancient ideas. So that's probably the reality behind it. But if we're going more into like the fun side, the fictional side of it, yeah, I guess you could say it's probably the gods just wanting to show off, what they can do. But I don't know, the sleep part, like, I don't know, there's no real, there's nothing really to gain from sleep from a god.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Okay, so I think we could go through the whole story. But one part of the story I kind of want to get to just briefly at least is to talk about Daedalus. So did you like Daedalus as a character? I thought he was amazing.
Of course. I mean, I think it's hard not to like him as a character. I mean, just like the horribleness of Pasiphae, who is Circe's other sister. So Pasiphae is her other sister. She's also a witch. However, she's very lazy. She's very beautiful. She's supposed to be a very beautiful goddess, but because of that, she sort of grew up getting pampered and taken care of, and she doesn't really work for anything. But she ends up marrying this mortal King Minos of Crete. Yeah. And they basically hate each other. And Daedalus is the greatest craftsman known to mankind. He crafts things like, wooden weaving machines and boats and pretty much anything. He crafts them pretty much as good as the gods. But Pasiphae basically just bullies the crap out of him. Yeah.
Oh my God. So the story and it's actually, even when I read it as a Greek myth, I thought it was the most insane, ridiculous Greek myth. It's hilarious, but it's like, it's just like, it's so nutty. But like the origins of the Minotaur.
Yeah.
Okay. So in my mind, she was Pasiphae, but whatever.
It probably is Pasiphae.
I have no idea, dude. But like, okay, so like, at some point the gods sent Minos like a white bull as kind of like an offering. I can't remember the circumstances why that white bull got sent there, but there was some like celestial, like holy white bull that like you had to like basically honor and respect, and you couldn't like defile it. Otherwise you just upset the gods. I don't remember why that white bull got there, but it did somehow. But anyway, so like Pasiphae was like, I really like that white bull. I want to get close to it and like do stuff to it, to like Daedalus. And she had Daedalus like make like I don't know, like a wooden bowl that she could like climb inside. I don't know why she would do this, but she like literally climbed inside this bowl that she had Daedalus make her, and then she like crept up to the white bowl from the gods and like basically like made a baby with the white bowl.
The white bull inseminated her, yes.
Yeah, so that white bull became the Minotaur, which is like this half man, half bull creature. And it was a really horrific monster that, was basically, it couldn't be defeated by basically any mortal at the time. And the way that they ended up sort of dealing with it is sort of Daedalus came up with this idea of trapping the Minotaur in a labyrinth. So that's kind of like she's weaving that sort of famous story into this one. And so the Minotaur is like trapped in this labyrinth underneath the palace of Minos. So I just thought that was a really interesting story. I really love how she just interweaves like all these Greek myths, and certainly the Minotaur is a really great one.
Yeah, and don't forget that labyrinth was created by Daedalus, right? I mean, isn't that correct?
Yeah, he made it. It was his idea of how to contain the Minotaur.
Yeah, I mean, I did really like him as a character because obviously, outside of just Pasiphae bullying him, he's just a really great human being. Like he's really humble. He's a really great craftsman, but he basically creates everything, and it seems like he's selfless about it. The thing that he cares about the most is the relationship with his son, right? Because his son,
his son Icarus.
Yeah, that's the thing he cares about the most. And I mean, who doesn't respect someone that's basically getting bullied by someone with power and just trying to take care of their own son? Like, that's a very sympathetic role. And so he's basically crafting all these great things for the good of the city, the good of the gods, the good of whoever the hell needs it. And here he is trying to take care of his son, and his life is just made miserable by this horrible, horrible goddess who is Circe's sister. So when Circe goes to Crete, she really sympathizes with Daedalus. And if I remember right, she's actually like she has a crush on him to some extent, or there's some kind of feelings there.
Definitely.
But of course nothing happens. I think Circe realizes it's kind of fruitless. But yeah, she ends up getting this really great wooden weaving machine to weave clothes. and she leaves Crete, and she remembers Daedalus for, I mean, the rest of her life. And he's mentioned many, many times throughout the rest of the book. And she inquires from Hermes about what happened to him. And he has a really tragic ending, if I remember right. Him and Icarus like jump off the cliff to escape or something. Do you remember that part more than me?
Well, I remember the story of Icarus. So basically, like you said, like Daedalus has a son, and they're basically trapped on Crete by Pasiphae. Like they can't leave this island. But he wants to show Icarus the world. Like Icarus is like, I want to see Egypt, and I want to go to all these places, and I want to see all these things, right. And I want to like live a full life. Like very similar actually to themes that you sort of encounter later on in the book when Circe has her own son, which is another thing that happens. But like basically like Daedalus wants to give Icarus like the world, and he can't because he's sort of like trapped. They're both trapped by Pasiphae. And so basically he devises a way to kind of like escape, I believe. And famously, of course, that's with the the wax wings or whatever. Like Daedalus and Icarus like develop they have these wings that are made of wax, and they fly, and then Icarus flies too close to the sun, and then Helios burns the wings, and then Icarus falls to his death into the ocean. So Daedalus ends up losing his son, which I think after that point it basically just like he's just like wrecked with grief kind of the rest of his life.
Yeah, but his role in the book is to give another mortal basically a redeeming character. He's like him. He's mortal, but we're supposed to really like him. He's very honest. He's very loyal. He has basically all his traits are good. He's a good human being, and he's a great role model for what we're talking about. Mortal beings really treasuring their lives and having value in everything they do, and just really trying to appreciate the time they have. And then Pasiphae is the exact opposite. So I guess of course, long answer short, I really did like Daedalus. He's a really great character. Yeah. But moving on, I think we need to move on to one of the most significant events in the book, and what everyone's going to be familiar with, and that's Odysseus arriving and meeting Circe. So you messaged me a few days ago when you were still reading this part, and you told me Odysseus was like your favorite character in the book except for Circe. And I felt the same way when I read his this part of the book. You know, we've already explained what happens to his men. They get turned into pigs. Odysseus is really cunning, and he basically convinces Circe to turn them back into humans, and he treats her with mostly respect. Like, they have a very close relationship, and it's very clear that Circe kind of wants Odysseus to stay on her island as long as possible.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And you're right. Like, at first I was really like won over by Odysseus. Like, I thought he was a great character, and I really thought that he was kind of like one of the most sympathetic mortals in the entire book. Because like he approaches Circe in like a very different way from like all the other mortals basically who had approached her up until that point, other than Daedalus, of course. And Daedalus is like almost like a demigod. Like, seriously, like it's crazy that he's actually just a god, like considering his powers and his skills.
I mean, just a human.
Yeah, just a human. Sorry, just a mortal. Yeah, exactly.
Just a god.
Just a human. He's just a human. So, but I mean, that's part of what makes Daedalus so amazing. But anyway, so like Odysseus approaches Circe, and so like the context of like the meeting is like basically Circe is on her island and she's a witch or whatever, and like some sailors come, and like at first like she's like really nice to the sailors, and like she's like, oh, humans, like I like you mortal people, like you're kind of nice, you remind me of Daedalus or whatever. And then like at first like eventually like the sailors like are like, oh, so like who are you related to, like who do I owe the honor to being here to? And she's like, oh, to me, it's only me. I belong to nobody. I belong to myself. And they're like, oh, really? And then so the sailors like inevitably are like, oh, okay. And then they all try and like basically rape her and like steal everything. And that's what happens at first. And she's really shocked. And she's like, oh my God, this is terrible. And so she like develops like these herbs and stuff like that can turn all of the men into pigs. And that's what she does. And she turns them into pigs. And like actually the description of like what happens to them is pretty horrific. Like, I don't know. Yeah, they turn into pigs from humans, and then she just like, so sometimes she throws the pigs off of like cliffs. Sometimes she just like lets them like burst like as they're transforming or something like that. I don't know. It's like pretty crazy descriptions of this. But she ends up doing this to basically every group of sailors that come to her island. And she's just doing this over and over again because, and eventually she just starts assuming that every sailor and every mortal that comes is just out to get her and they're horrible. And she just wants to turn them all into pigs and she wants to kill them all. And so that's how she like becomes a famous witch of Aea or whatever. And then eventually Odysseus comes, and Odysseus kind of like, he differentiates himself from the other sailors in like a really striking way. And he just like approaches her kind of like calmly and like kind of rationally. And like I think one of his first statements to her is like he compliments the loom that Daedalus gave her. And so he's complimenting this loom, and he's like saying it's really amazing. And he's also like really self-deprecating. Like he's constantly like talking like kind of shit about himself. He's like, oh, I'm not that good, I'm not that great, I'm not that awesome, like whatever, like I have my failings, like I'm not like the greatest human ever or whatever. And like I think all of these things together kind of like wins over Circe. But yeah, so I don't know what but yeah, I mean, originally I really thought Odysseus was sympathetic and great, and I thought that he represented something very different, but then later on we learned that that's not really the case.
Obviously with the Odyssey, the end of the book, he gets home to Ithaca, and Penelope and his son Telemachus are being besieged by all these like rich people trying to basically marry Penelope and trying to take over the estate and take over all the wealth that Odysseus had left behind, because Odysseus is gone for like, I don't know, 10 years or 15 years, some really long amount of time. And he basically has to, with the help of Athena, murder all these people that are trying to take advantage of his wife and his estate and everything. So that's basically how the Odyssey ends. You don't really know what happens after that. Odysseus comes home, he takes revenge on these like suitors, and he gets his family back. And that's the end of the Odyssey. Now, Miller kind of plays upon, she kind of gives you a look at a potential path that could happen. So I don't take this as like what would definitely happen in the Odyssey, but it's an alternate possibility, is that Odysseus basically goes mad. He becomes really bored on Ithaca. He becomes really bored because there's no military to control. There's no people to command. He's a big thinker. He needs like big problems to solve. He needs hunting. He needs killing. But then he's also very paranoid. He's always paranoid that these people are going to come and try to take his estate. They're out to get him. And eventually that paranoia turns into everyone around him, including his son, who he basically thinks is useless. So Telemachus is like a great like farmer. He's great, like he's a great son, but he's not a warrior at all. He doesn't follow in his father's footsteps in the least. He's kind of intelligent. He's kind of a bit more simple, as he wants just to live a good life, take care of his parents, take care of the land. And Odysseus kind of resents him for this, because Odysseus is the world hero. He's the man everybody loves. So he takes all this paranoia, all this resentment, basically just drives him mad. And he makes Telemachus do these terrible things, like murder these innocent women. And so this is a retelling of an alternate possibility that the Odyssey could have spiraled into.
Yeah, like he becomes kind of sort of disgruntled, kind of just angry old man, kind of just really unhappy with sort of the final days of his life and sort of where things have taken him. Like he really just sort of yearns for the glory and the days of old where he was like kind of the greatest human. Like he was known as the best of the Greeks. So I mean, I think that's like a really high title. It's just, yeah, he just becomes really just kind of bitter and just horrible. Yeah, like he just loses everything.
So yeah, I think you kind of made him sound a little nicer there than I did, actually. But I'm wondering, like, how much responsibility do you place on him? Or is this kind of the fault of Athena and the gods and their sort of meddling with human affairs?
I think, well, the thing is it's interesting because I think Miller sort of like clearly shows us that we can go along with sort of the machinations or of the gods like Athena, or we can choose to oppose them. And I think she's saying that Odysseus had the ability to basically not go along with these sort of paths that were forced on him, but he chose to. And I think in sort of like going like with them sort of so passionately, he sort of lost all connection with his roots on Ithaca. And it just sort of made him like incapable of sort of finding meaning and peace at home because he was so like just compelled towards the idea of how he should be by Athena.
Yeah, but I find that to be a little bit hard to say no to the gods in this situation. You're basically, if you say no, like what character does later in the book, basically you're just abandoned. Like the gods are like, well, you're never getting this opportunity again. Your name will never be written in the history books. You'll have no glory. Maybe you'll live a happy life. You might live a comfortable life, but no one will remember you. You'll have no glory. And these are all traits that the ancient Greeks found to be like really important. You know, like chasing glory, being good on the battlefield, defending your country. Like these are all like really like, you know, valor, honor, strength. These are all like characteristics that the Greeks really admired. And so you have to basically turn all of that down.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's definitely pretty interesting. I think there's some side to Odysseus's sort of downfall that is a little bit not Odysseus's fault because he is mortal, and I think she kind of like weaves in sort of these ideas that are common now that we have about sort of like ex soldiers and sort of like PTSD and sort of like the struggles of that sort of experience. I think she's kind of interweaving that a little bit, like, and like Penelope kind of mentions this when she's like referring to kind of like Spartans. And she's just like, we know men like Odysseus. We know like why they become so bitter and angry when they get older. Like this is very common among older soldiers, and we're Spartans, and we're very familiar with this sort of thing. So she's like, so actually Penelope is actually being very sympathetic towards Odysseus at one point, even after all this horrible stuff that he's done.
Yeah, that's interesting. And her character is also one that's pretty interesting. So this is sort of getting into like the last section of the book, but yeah. Penelope ends up on her islands, and there's a little bit of, well, there's a possible confrontation between Circe and Penelope, but I think we have to talk about something else first, and that's the fact that Circe has a son. She bears Odysseus's bastard child, basically, and well, he's not a bastard because they know who his father is, but he basically loses his father. Odysseus is gone, and is it Telegonus? Is that her son's name? Yeah, she has a son named Telegonus.
I don't know. I said Telegonus, but yeah, Telegonus. Oh my god, every single name is different. Yeah. Telegonus.
I'm gonna call him Telegonus because I don't know. It sounds more appropriate to me. So Telegonus grows up with his mom, and she really kind of. This is actually the one thing that Circe actually kind of does wrong herself. She basically teaches Telegonus that his father rather, was a great hero, and all his stories were good. He was a very admirable person, and he never did anything wrong. But I guess at this point, she didn't really know about Odysseus's. She didn't meet Penelope or Telemachus, Odysseus's son and wife. So she had no access to this information on what became of Odysseus after. So she raised Telemachus believing that his father was like the greatest hero that ever lived, and he was absolutely virtuous to a fault. Like he didn't do there's no character flaw whatsoever within him. And so Telegonus obviously grows up wanting to be like his father. He wants to explore the world, and he wants to meet his father, and he sort of wants to do great things. He wants to be an honorable hero himself. And you can't really fault him for this, especially considering Circe tells him like, oh, your father was like this. But then that brings me back to the point that the stories merge where Penelope and Telemachus get to the island. And you think there's going to be this big like brawl, or there's going to be like a shootout, kind of like a Western saloon shootout where two sides versus the other side, last man standing. And you think it's going to be like Telemachus and Penelope versus Telegonus and Circe, and some stuff's going to go down. But, well, actually, I guess one thing I totally sorry, I'm like jumping around. I haven't read this book in a while. But yeah, actually, you find out Telegonus ends up killing his father Odysseus by accident.
Yeah. And that's actually a really interesting story too, as well. So in order for that event to occur, Circe has to, well, first of all, Circe sends Telegonus to Ithaca, because Telegonus is like, I can't stand this island. This is terrible. Like you can't keep me trapped here. I need to see the world. Like, let me be free. And then so Circe eventually relents, is like, okay, you can go, but you have to wait like 3 days before you can go. And like part of the preparation of sending or allowing Telegonus to go to Ithaca was sort of like a weapon for like kind of like self-defense. And I actually really loved this scene. It was really cool. But like and they're gonna make like a TV series on this, and I can't wait for the scene. It's gonna be awesome. But like Circe like basically walks into the ocean. Like she doesn't like swim because that would be too like mortal like. She's literally like walking on the ground like through the ocean, and she's just like walking and walking to like this like deep layer, and she encounters this kind of like, I don't know, like uber god called Trigon, and she just like talks to Trigon, and she's like, give me some powers so I can protect my son. And then Trigon's like, why should I? Like, I don't care about mortals. Like, mortals are boring, and actually this whole world's boring, so whatever, screw you guys. And like Trigon does not, he has no interest at all in basically anything. But then he's like, okay, I'll give you some powers, but you have to basically agree to this, I don't know, this deal with me. And Circe's like, okay, anything, fine, just let me have some powers. And then he's like, okay, fine, but the only way that I will give you these powers is if you have to feel basically unending torment and torture for the rest of your existence, for all of eternity, because you're a god. But then, okay, fine, I'll give you some powers so that you can kill Telegonus. And and then Circe's like, I'll do anything.
Well, doesn't
fine.
she have to like touch his tail?
Yeah, but she's like, fine, I'll do anything. And then Trigon's like, yes, you can touch my tail and take the powers. And so then she does, and she grabs his tail and cuts it off. And he actually tells her, like, cut off my tail. You can use this as like a weapon. And like this tail is like basically the only thing that can it can kill a lesser god, and it can basically like seriously mime like a greater god. So it's like a very powerful weapon. And then so she gets this weapon and she gives it to Telegonus, and she's like, okay, be safe, you can go on your voyage now, whatever. And so he goes to Ithaca, and then angry old like crazy Odysseus like runs up to him, is like, what are you doing? And then Telegonus like, or actually Odysseus like kind of grabs the spear and like touches the end a little bit, and then that's the end of Odysseus.
I really want to hear you tell some stories. I feel like you'd be really good at like, reading like, children's stories online or something. All the little voices you use and everything. Anyway, so yeah, that's the end of Odysseus. Bye-bye. So he goes back, and obviously Telegonus is stricken with grief, and you end up with a situation where Penelope and Telemachus are actually kind of sympathetic towards him. They feel bad. And moreover, Telemachus actually hates his father. He literally hates him. And he's like the opposite, like I said earlier, like 10 minutes ago, he's the opposite of his father in every way, and he literally resents him. And he's horrified that his father basically made him hang these like 4 maids or these 4 women who he murdered. It seems kind of weird because it's like Penelope and Telegonus become closer, and Telemachus and Circe become closer. Very unlikely. And it turns out Telemachus is like more interested in the herbs and the stuff that Circe is using to craft her plants, and Telegonus is like hanging out with Penelope, and he's learning how to swim, and he wants to get the boat up and going because he wants to leave the islands. And then so you end up with this kind of like this dysfunctional but happy, somewhat family going on here. And Athena, who we should have actually mentioned earlier, Athena basically threatens to kill Telemachus at birth. She basically tries to give Circe to give up. She wants him to give up her son, and in turn, she's going to do something, give Circe like any favor or something like that. And so Circe has to use all this magic all the time to protect her island, make it so Athena can't come in. And you get the sense that Athena is like always watching. She's just waiting for any opening to come in and kill Telegonus. And for whatever reason, she really wants to kill this son. And eventually she comes back. So she comes back finally. Circe agrees. Hermes comes back, and they agree to end the spell over the island. And Athena asks Telemachus, Odysseus' son, because she loves Odysseus, if he wants to take his own country, if he wants to basically follow her, listen to what she tells him to do. And if he does that, he's going to get eternal glory. He's going to go to this new land, found a city, and he's going to be a hero, just like his father. But of course, that's like the opposite of Telemachus. So he's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just make boats and hang out and, live a happy, quiet life. I don't want that stuff. But of course, in the book, it's it's kind of a given that it's really hard to say no to a god. Like, I don't think that'd be an easy thing to do.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
It's a really hard thing. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the ending is pretty great. There's kind of like this swap of paths, I guess you could say. I'm not sure. Like all of the central characters kind of end up in a much better place. And they end up kind of like doing things, and they're kind of like where they want to be. But it's kind of surprising, actually, the paths that the different characters take. Like Penelope ends up staying on the island, and she kind of like decides that she wants to like be a witch, which is kind of interesting. You wouldn't expect that this former, like, I don't know, I guess you could say queen of Ithaca is like, oh yeah, I want to go to an island to become a witch. And then she did. And so that's kind of funny in some ways. And then, yeah, like you said, Telegonus accepts the offer of Athena and is like, okay, I will go to try and accomplish this glory. It's actually kind of weird. I think she was like referencing Italy, and I was wondering like if that had something to do with some other myth. Like, is that related to have you heard of like the Aena or whatever it's called? It's basically like the Roman
in the Aeneid.
Well, the Aeneid, is it the Aeneid? It's like the Roman Odyssey.
Yeah, it's actually it's a pretty good book. I mean, Aeneid's the sole survivor. Well, there might be a few other people. He's basically the sole survivor of the attack on Troy. He's on the Trojan side, and he ends up escaping thanks to the gods, and he ends up being the founder of Rome.
Yeah, but I was wondering if there was some connection maybe with Rome and Telegonus. I was just curious because he went to Italy, and it just seemed like maybe. I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. And because they're always like talking about like you're going to found a new dynasty and you're going to bring the Greek energy into the Italian peninsula. I don't know. It just kind of like sounded like a little bit like maybe the foundations of Rome, but I don't know. I could be wrong. I would be curious to know like exactly where she was headed with that. But yeah, so then obviously Telemachus and Circe are together now, like you said, and they kind of end up leaving the island together. So before that, Circe kind of like has this like conversation with her father, and it was really kind of an interesting conversation. So with Helios, because Circe's like, okay, you're gonna end my exile now, and Helios is like, what? Like, why would you ask such a ridiculous question? Like that's like nonsense. Like why would I do that? And then Circe's like, well, if you don't, I'm gonna tell all the gods and everybody that I helped Prometheus. And then she's basically like saying that she's going to foment like a war between the Olympians and the Titans, and she's just like, if you don't like do this, I will create a war between all of the gods, and you basically you have to talk to Zeus and you have to free me. And then Helios is like, okay, fine. And then Circe can leave the island, and then she does end up leaving the island, and she goes to. The first thing that they do is they go to kill Scylla. So like kind of like she's basically like ending that sort of issue that she created at the beginning. So no longer will Scylla like kill all the humans or whatever. And I thought that was a really great scene. It was really cool that finally that she used the I don't know, the powers that Trigon gave her with that tail and put a little bit of poison, and then Scylla died. So I thought that was it was really cool. It was really like great to see that finally came to a conclusion. And then, yeah, so she ends up falling in love with Telemachus, and they end up traveling and then going back to the island. I guess they have daughters, and then it ends with Circe deciding that she wants to become immortal too.
All right, so that's pretty much the story. And of course, at this point, Circe is like 1,000 years old. Like, I don't think the book ever says how old she is, but she's lived for hundreds of years. And she basically says like, oh my God, like I would never be a good mortal because it took me so long. I literally lived for like 200 years before I even like knew what to do with my life. You get the sense that most of the gods would be like that. They'd have these really, really, really prolonged adolescent stages, really, really, really prolonged teenage stages, and then most of them never really move past that. Circe kind of does because of her connection to mortals and her sympathy and not feeling like she fits in with the gods. So it actually kind of ends up being her blessing that she doesn't end up with this kind of fate of being stuck in like an eternal adolescence, basically living meaningless, like basically living like a meaningless existence forever, thinking that you're tiny squabbles with other gods and controlling people like chess pieces and showing off all the work that you don't even have to fight for. She basically avoids the possible curse. I mean, I guess to some people that fate would be better to be a god. I think that's the whole point of this podcast, is we're trying to resolve that, or trying to find an answer for ourselves. And for me, I mean, even though immortality sounds really appealing in some ways, it's obvious from this book that there's a side of it that would be absolute hell, and you would basically be stuck with a very long time of meaninglessness. And if you did find any meaning, and this is actually the part that's kind of interesting, if you did find any meaning, it would be gone, because meaning doesn't stay forever. You know, everyone you fall in love with is going to die, unless you're like falling in love with a god. But I mean, you're not going to keep a relationship for eternity. It's impossible. So if you fall in love with a human, they're going to die. If you were to pick up like a hobby or something, you're going to die. If you get attached to a city, it's going to crumble. So the gods, essentially, like anything they find meaning in is going to be gone, but they're still going to be there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like, I think one of the major themes that she really kind of espouses is that you can't really find meaning in things that are changeless. Like, they have to change, and either change for the better or change for the worse. They can't just be this like unchanging thing, or otherwise it's like there's no meaning and purpose to be found at all. Like, it's really interesting that like she always talks about the islands, and she talks about the shores. So like this book is really great for its like kind of nature descriptions, and like she talks about how the shores and the islands are always changing, and like even if she comes to them like 100 years later, like she notices all the differences and the changes. And it's like, I feel like she's in love with the mortals because she recognizes that they do change. And like if you don't have like the, I don't know, just like the idea that things can get worse, then there's no real like purpose for kind of like making them good. You know, like there's no struggle, there's no effort, there's no meaning, there's no anything if like everything is just sort of like this unchanging kind of thing. So I think that's sort of part of it. But yeah, I thought it was a really compelling like exploration into kind of like the value of sort of human mortality. I thought it was great. I thought the beginning was really great because it really opened with Prometheus, who gave humanity fire. And then it sort of ends with her kind of joining sort of that sort of mortal sort of process that Prometheus is sort of like engaging in every single day, as he sort of like, you know, he has to sort of live and die in like this very cyclical kind of way. So he's sort of like joining that like sort of pattern that Prometheus lived, although obviously she's only going to die once. But yeah, it was just like interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's a really interesting take because, I mean, the gods, we all grew up thinking the gods are so cool. Like, who wouldn't want to be Zeus? When you're a kid, you're like, oh man, I'd love to be Zeus, like shoot lightning bolts and just do whatever I wanted to do. But like, this book really makes you question like all that stuff. Like, the gods are fairly two-dimensional, and they're pretty nasty beings at the end of the day. Like, at least there's that possibility of that. I don't think the ancient Greeks necessarily thought the gods were evil, but I think that they reflected people enough where they had those bad qualities. I mean, even though there's all those stories and stuff, like all those stories are fairly didactic. They're made to kind of teach people lessons. And I think the gods in those stories, if you were to take them all and lump them together, most of the gods would not come out looking good at the end of the day. Yeah. There might be a few that do.
Yeah.
For the most part, the gods do pretty terrible things.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's definitely like her other theme, is that you can't even really be a good being if you're immortal. At least not typically. The norm is not really to be kind of good. And sort of like your goodness and your morality as a being kind of comes from your mortality, it seems. Because it seems like like Circe sort of develops like her morality and her kindness through kind of her experiences of being treated badly. And I think that's really interesting. Because if you're kind of just like perfect and nothing is ever wrong, it's like you're just gonna like kind of play other beings and kind of I don't know, seek power. I don't think you're really going to be so concerned about the lives of like little things, like little ants that aren't important. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed kind of the moral and the end of this story. It was really great. What did you think about it?
I thought it was really good too. I mean, I think this is amazing that Greek story. I think it's amazing that Greek history and Greek mythology and Greek culture can still actually give us modern tales. And I think for anyone who doesn't like reading old stories, like maybe the Odyssey is a little bit hard to read with today's English or today, whatever language you're reading it in, actually, you can read something like Circe because it's much more modern and the language is much more conversational. It's really beautifully written, but it's also it's not a hard read. It's not going to challenge you. It's not anything that's like you need to reread pages like 3 times. So yeah, I mean, I really love the morals of the story. I really love the writing. I really love the themes in the book. And I think this is an awesome book for anyone who appreciates history, mythology, Greek culture, or just kind of like morality. Because at the end of the day, this is really like in defense of human beings and sort of like us finding value. It's kind of inspirational, I should say. It's inspirational in that it kind of tells you that you should appreciate your life. You should actually use the time you have to better yourself, better those around you, and appreciate everything. I mean, that's kind of if you really break the book down and try to put it in a nutshell, I think that's what I would take away.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it's this age old sort of like lesson that I think you get from a lot of different sources, but it's basically that what makes us weak is really what makes us strong in the end. It's kind of like what makes us so weak and frail, like really gives us meaning and purpose, and we can develop morality and ethics based on all of these just frailings. Like we're so weak. We need to live in strong communities. We need to have good relationships with other people, because if we don't, we're just alone, and without other people, like we're far, far more likely to suffer in our lives. So it's like a lot of the things that make us like so bad also make us really good. And I think that's a really interesting lesson. And I think that's a story about sort of humanity and what it means to be human, is you can find strength in the things that make you weak too. It's kind of like, it seems like a contradiction, but really in the end, when you really like sit down and consider what life would be like as a god, you realize that most people probably wouldn't really want that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's really cool that, I mean, we're willing to play with history. Like, it's really amazing just to hear someone actually take an age-old story like the Odyssey and give us a twist ending out of it. I really would love to see more authors take risks with stories like this, because it relies so much on Greek mythology, yet it's its own story. And I think Toby's absolutely right. It's sort of like, every character in this book, from Daedalus to Odysseus to Telemachus to Penelope, like they all have so much suffering and so many like problems in their life, but yet they have so much appreciation for certain aspects of their life. And there's tragic characters, and there's kind of more characters that are a bit more pure, have like a simpler life. But at the end of the day, like it's our struggles, it's everything that we don't take for granted that basically makes us special and allows us to enjoy this life. So if you guys want to check this book out, I definitely recommend it. And I think we're gonna end it for today. So guys, we'll see you on the next episode of the Pixel Meditations.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Pixel Meditations. We hope you enjoyed the episode as much as we did. If so, please support us and help spread the word so we can reach new listeners. You can do this by simply subscribing to our podcast, leaving us ratings and reviews on your favorite podcast apps, and by sharing our content. Your feedback and ideas are very important to us, so please get in contact with any requests, comments, or suggestions. You can find us on Twitter at Pixel Meditation, Gmail at thepixelmeditations@gmail.com, and Facebook at the Pixel Meditations page.